Charcoal smoke was drifting into my window, but it was my son-in-law's mocking laugh that really burned me inside. I am Helen. I am 68 years old, and I am the owner of this house and everything in it. They think I am a useless old woman, but they forgot who holds the keys to the fortress. The heat that afternoon was unbearable, the kind that sticks to your skin like melted plastic. I was in my bedroom, sitting in my reading chair, trying to concentrate on the monthly bills, but the racket outside would not leave me in peace. Since early morning, my daughter Sarah and her husband Ryan had been moving furniture, bringing in coolers, and setting up the sound system in the backyard. It was not just any backyard. It was the garden that my late husband and I built with years of hard work, with its imported ceramic tiles and that pergola that Ryan was now using as if he were the king of the castle. I had owned a catering company for 30 years. I know what it takes to organize a party. I know what it means to serve people. And above all, I know when someone is welcome and when they are not. That afternoon, it became perfectly clear that I was not on the guest list in my own home. "Mom, do not worry about a thing. We will take care of it," Sarah had told me that morning, using that sweet little voice she uses when she wants me to stay quiet and stay out of the way. "Get some rest. You look tired." Tired. That is the favorite word young people use to describe us when what they really mean is old. I was not tired. I was fed up. Fed up that, since they moved in temporarily 2 years ago, my space had slowly been reduced until I was confined to my bedroom and the kitchen, and only when it suited them for me to cook something delicious. The smell of grilled meat started to slip under my door. Sausages, ribs, maybe a good flank steak. My stomach rumbled. Not from hunger, but from the indignation that they did not even have the decency to offer me a plate. I heard laughter, modern music with that repetitive beat that makes the windows rattle, and the sound of beer cans cracking open one after another. They were Ryan's friends, people I did not even know, strangers stepping on my lawn, using my chairs, drinking under my roof. I decided I was not going to stay locked up like a prisoner. I stood up, smoothed out the crisp linen blouse I had put on, and fixed my hair in front of the mirror. I still had my elegance, that straight posture given to me by years of running industrial kitchens. I grabbed my hand fan, an old wooden one I always carried with me, not just for the heat, but because it gave my hands something to do when I got nervous. I walked toward the door that led to the patio. When I slid the glass door open, the wave of heat hit me instantly, mixed with the thick smoke from the grill. There were about 15 people out there, all young, loud, holding plastic cups. Sarah was serving drinks at a makeshift table, laughing way too hard at a joke told by one of her husband's friends. Nobody noticed my presence at first. I took 2 steps outside with the intention of saying hello, of making my presence known, of reminding them that this house had an owner. Maybe, just maybe, I wanted a little piece of that meat that smelled so good. Ryan was standing in front of the grill, wearing a ridiculous apron that read, "The Boss," holding a pair of tongs. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with his forearm, and when he turned around to look for more salt, he saw me. His smile froze for a second, but then it morphed into that condescending smirk I absolutely detested. He did not greet me. He did not offer me a seat. He did not say, "Helen, come try this." He raised his voice so everyone could hear him, momentarily silencing the nearby conversations. "Mother-in-law, what are you doing out here in this awful heat?" he shouted, with a fake concern that dripped with poison. "You better stay inside, with the air conditioning and your soap operas. This is strictly a younger crowd. You know how crazy things can get. We do not want your blood pressure going up." There was a short silence, followed by several stupid giggles from his friends. Sarah, my own daughter, looked away, pretending to organize some napkins. That was the true betrayal, not the idiotic comment from a son-in-law who thinks he rules the world because he sold 2 cars last month, but the silence of the daughter whose college and wedding I paid for, the daughter to whom I opened the doors of my home when debt was drowning them. "I just came to see if you needed anything," I said, keeping my voice steady, even though my knees were trembling with pure rage on the inside. No, no, not at all, Ryan insisted, waving his tongs around as if shooing away a fly. We have everything under control. Go on, go get some rest. I promise we will bring you a little plate with the leftovers later. I mean, whatever is left, just so you do not have to cook. The leftovers. The word echoed in my head like a gong. I felt the blood rush to my face, hot and heavy. I squeezed the fan so hard I felt the wood creak slightly beneath my fingers. I looked into Ryan's eyes and saw a gleam of triumph. He was enjoying this. He enjoyed humiliating me in front of his pack to prove who the alpha male of the house was. I did not say another word. I was not going to give them the spectacle of an old woman yelling or crying. My dignity was worth more than his cheap barbecue. I turned around, my back straight, and went back inside the house. I closed the sliding glass door behind me. The noise of the party was muffled, but it did not disappear. I stood there for a moment, looking out through the glass. I watched them laugh, clinking their cans together, celebrating my retreat. Ryan patted one of his friends on the back and pointed toward the house, probably making another joke at my expense. I went back to my room. The air conditioner was running, humming softly, a brutal contrast to the inferno happening outside. I sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking. Now they were shaking uncontrollably. Humiliation is a strange feeling. It starts in the stomach, like a sharp blow, and then spreads like a cold poison that numbs your limbs. I turned on the television to drown out my thoughts, but I was not really seeing the images. I only saw Ryan's face and Sarah's back. This is strictly a younger crowd. The phrase kept repeating in my mind, as if youth were a merit and old age a punishment, as if this house, which I paid for penny by penny, brick by brick, no longer belonged to me just because I have wrinkles and gray hair. 20 minutes passed. On the television screen, the local news interrupted their regular programming. A weather alert. A cold front was colliding with the heat wave, creating the perfect conditions for a severe and sudden thunderstorm. The anchorman spoke of strong winds and falling hail in the northern part of the city, exactly where we lived. I looked toward my bedroom window. The sky, which until recently was a bright and cruel blue, was turning a leaden gray, almost purple. The clouds moved fast, devouring the sunlight. It was one of those summer storms that arrive without warning and strike with the force of 1,000 hammers. I stood up and walked to the main living room, which had a panoramic view of the backyard. They were still doing their thing, too drunk and too busy being young to look up. The music was so loud they did not hear the first thunderclap, a dull, distant roar that made the floor vibrate beneath my bare feet. It was then that I saw something on the entryway table. It was not a magical object or a sentimental keepsake. It was the smart home control panel. When my husband got sick, we modernized the house to make everything easier. Doors, lights, and most importantly, the metal security shutters. An expensive German system designed to protect the large windows against hurricanes and burglars. A system that could be controlled from that panel or from my cell phone, but which had a manual total lockdown mode that only I knew how to operate perfectly, because I was the one who actually read the manual, not Ryan, who thinks he is too smart to read instructions. I approached the panel. My fingers brushed the touch screen. Outside, the wind started tossing napkins and empty plastic cups into the air. I saw Sarah grabbing her hair, looking up at the sky in confusion. Ryan looked up with a rib in his hand just as the first drop fell. It was not a normal drop. It was a heavy, warm drop that exploded against the ceramic floor. Then came another and another. In a matter of seconds, the sky split open. It was not a gradual rain. It was a violent curtain of water, a waterfall crashing down with fury. The wind blew hard, knocking over the umbrella that covered the drink table. The young people started screaming. The music from the sound system crackled and cut out abruptly when the water reached the cables. Chaos was unleashed in my garden. They scattered like roaches when the lights come on. They grabbed the trays of meat, the bottles, their bags, desperately seeking shelter. And the only shelter was the sliding glass door that led into my living room. I watched them sprint toward the house. Ryan was at the front, shoving one of his friends out of the way to get there first, his face soaking wet and twisted in panic. Sarah was right behind him, shielding her head with a plastic tray. I was standing just on the other side of the glass, calm, completely dry. Ryan reached the door and yanked the handle. It was locked. I had locked the manual latch before going to my room, almost on instinct, a habit from years of always locking doors behind me. But now, that lock was my barrier. Ryan slammed his palm against the glass, shouting something I could not hear over the roar of the storm, but I read his lips perfectly. "Open! Open the door!" He looked me right in the eyes. I was on the other side, just a few inches away, separated by double glazing. I did not move. I made no gesture to turn the lock. I just looked at him. He pounded again, harder this time, getting desperate because the hail was starting to fall, stones of ice the size of marbles hitting their heads and their precious young bodies. "Mom, open up!" Sarah screamed, pressing her face against the glass, her makeup running down her cheeks. It was in that moment that I remembered his words. This is strictly a younger crowd. Well, if the patio is for the young people, the house is for the owner, and the owner was dry. I raised my hand slowly, not to unlock the door, but to touch the control panel on the wall right next to it. My fingers, the ones they claimed were useless now, firmly pressed the button that read, "Security Lockdown, Storm Mode." A mechanical humming began to sound. From the top of the sliding door frame, the heavy metal security shutter began to descend. Slowly, inexorably. Ryan's eyes widened like saucers. He stopped pounding on the glass and stood paralyzed, watching the sheet of metal come down inch by inch, placing itself between his ruined party and my sanctuary. "Mother-in-law, no, everything is going to get wet," he yelled, finally understanding what was happening. I did not smile. I did not need to. I just stared at him intently as the shutter lowered to the level of his eyes, then his nose, then his open mouth, until the final click sealed the house completely. Darkness fell over the living room as the shutter closed, but I did not turn on the light. I stood there in the shadows, listening to the furious battering of the rain and the muffled, distant screams coming from the patio. I could no longer see them, and more importantly, they could no longer see me. I walked back to my bedroom, feeling a strange calmness in my chest. I sat down in my chair again. The news anchor was still talking about the storm, warning that it would last at least 2 hours. 2 hours of water, wind, and hail. I looked at my hands. They were no longer shaking. They were the hands of a woman who had worked her entire life. Strong hands, capable hands. Hands that had just taught the most important lesson of the afternoon without saying a single word. I grabbed my tablet to check my bank accounts. There was a pending transfer I had been hesitating to make for days. The auto insurance payment for Ryan's truck, which was under my name. I canceled the transaction with a simple tap of my index finger. Outside, the storm roared with strength, but in here, the silence was mine. And I was just starting to enjoy it when I heard them trying to force open the service door, the one that leads to the kitchen. I smiled to myself. They forgot that door has an iron crossbar I had installed 10 years ago after the neighbor's house was broken into. I settled deeper into my chair and turned up the volume on the TV. It was going to be a long afternoon, and for the first time in a long time, I held the remote control to everything that mattered. The sound of the hail hitting the metal security shutters was deafening, as if an army of little soldiers were throwing rocks against my fortress. But in here, in the hallway connecting the living room to the bedrooms, the noise felt distant, muffled by the quality of the materials my husband and I had chosen decades ago. I walked slowly, feeling the coolness of the marble floor beneath my bare feet. There was no guilt in my chest, only a clinical cold curiosity, similar to what I felt when I audited my company's inventory and discovered cases of wine missing. I headed to the kitchen, Not because I was hungry, but because the central monitor for the security cameras was there. If they thought I did not understand technology just because I was old, they were dead wrong. I was the one who insisted on installing the perimeter cameras when crime went up in the neighborhood. Ryan had mocked me back then, saying it was just elderly paranoia. Now, those cameras were my eyes. I tapped the screen with my index finger. The image flickered for a second and then stabilized in black and white, with that greenish tint of night vision. What I saw made me straighten my back even more. The patio was a disaster. The storm had turned my magazine cover garden into a swamp. The pergola, that wooden structure under which Ryan felt like the king of the barbecue, barely protected them. The sideways wind was blowing rain in from everywhere. I could see my son-in-law's friends, those boys who had been laughing at my age just minutes before, huddled together like wet chickens, trying to cover themselves with the cushions from my patio furniture, which, by the way, were going to be completely ruined. I zoomed in on the image by pinching the screen. There was Ryan pounding on the service door with his fist, screaming something the camera microphones barely picked up over the roaring wind. Sarah was right beside him, hugging herself, shivering. Her perfect makeup had to be a distant memory. For a split second, my maternal instinct tried to betray me. Seeing a daughter suffer always hurts, but then I remembered her silence. That complicit silence when her husband told me to lock myself away with my soap operas. That silence weighed more than 1,000 storms. "This is strictly a younger crowd," I muttered to myself, repeating his sentence. Well then, let their youth keep them warm, because I was not going to waste a single watt of my heating on them tonight. I left the kitchen and headed to my home office. I had not been in there with a real purpose in months. Ever since I retired, Ryan had been colonizing that space, filling it with boxes of car parts, sports magazines, and cheap amateur soccer trophies. Seeing my mahogany bookshelves where my accounting and business management books used to rest, invaded by his mess, gave me a sharp pang of anger I had not noticed before. I had let them push me out. I had surrendered territory inch by inch, thinking that was what good mothers and prudent mothers-in-law did. What sheer stupidity! I swept a pile of baseball caps off my desk with one motion and opened the bottom drawer, the one I always kept locked. The key was hanging around my neck under my blouse next to my scapular. It was a small gold key that opened the floor safe. I knelt down, feeling a crack in my knees that I chose to ignore. When I opened the safe, the smell of old paper and cold metal greeted me like an old friend. There was no jewelry or cash in there. That was in the bank. In there was my real power, the power they ignored or chose to forget. I pulled out a black leather folder and an object I thought I had lost. My old, heavy, thick-barreled black fountain pen, the one I used to sign every major contract in my life. I uncapped it. It still had ink. I sat down in the swivel chair, the one Ryan kept saying was too outdated and wanted to replace with a flashy gaming chair. I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was the property deed for the house. My name, Helen, was right there, clear and strong, as the sole owner after my husband's passing. But that was not the most important thing. The most important thing was the document underneath it. The private loan agreement I drew up for Ryan 2 years ago for his car dealership venture. A venture that, as far as I knew, had not turned a single dime in profit, yet somehow allowed him to buy premium meat and imported beers. I read the clauses. In the event of a failure to pay for 3 consecutive months, the creditor, me, has the right to execute guarantees. Ryan had gone 5 months without paying me even the interest, always using the excuse that the market was slow and telling me to be patient. And I, the fool, the useless old woman, had been patient. I picked up the fountain pen. The weight of the instrument in my hand made me feel alive again. It was not the trembling hand of a frightened old lady. It was the hand of a woman who built a business from scratch while raising a daughter and caring for a sick husband. "Patience is over," I said out loud. I started crunching numbers on a blank sheet of paper, and not just the loan. I started mentally adding up the household expenses that I covered 100%: electricity, water, internet, the cleaning service that washed Ryan's underwear, the groceries that filled the fridge, and that they devoured without asking. The number that appeared on the paper was scandalous. For 2 years, I had been subsidizing their lifestyle as successful young adults, while they treated me like a piece of old furniture cluttering the hallway. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. How had I allowed this? The answer was painful but simple. Fear of loneliness. When my husband died, the silence of this massive house terrified me. When Sarah suggested moving in for a while to keep me company, I felt relieved. I thought it would be like the old days, just the two of us against the world, with the addition of a son-in-law who seemed nice enough. But the dynamic shifted subtly. First, it was jokes about my cleaning habits. Then, criticisms about how I cooked. Later, making decisions without consulting me. Changing the color of the living room. Pruning my rose bushes because they attracted bees. Inviting people over at all hours. I made myself smaller so they could fit. I kept quiet so I would not be the wicked mother-in-law. And in that process of shrinking myself, they became giants, feeding off my space and my kindness. I opened my eyes and looked at the security cameras on my tablet again. The rain was not stopping. Ryan was now trying to force open one of the side windows, but the metal shutters were rolled all the way down to the floor. It was useless. I saw him kick the wall in frustration. I got up and went to the kitchen to make myself some coffee. Not just any coffee. I pulled out the clay pot I kept in the upper cabinet, the one Sarah said took up too much space, and set water to boil with cinnamon and brown sugar. The sweet, spiced aroma began to fill the kitchen. A smell of home, of tradition. While the coffee boiled, I heard the landline ring. I ignored it. The front doorbell rang, insistent, desperate. I ignored it. I knew it was them. They had probably walked all the way around the house in the storm to try and get in through the front. But the front door was solid oak with a double deadbolt. I poured the coffee into my favorite mug, a thick ceramic one I bought on a trip to Santa Fe 20 years ago. The warmth of the mug in my hands comforted me. I took a long sip, letting the strong, sweet flavor awaken my senses. I walked toward the main living room, which was shrouded in shadows because of the closed shutters. I sat on the sofa with my coffee in one hand and my tablet in the other. I felt like an orchestra conductor before the concert began, or rather like a general surveying the battlefield from a hilltop. They thought my power lay in my ability to cook or babysit grandchildren that did not even exist yet. They did not understand that my power was structural. This house breathed because I paid the bills. They surfed the internet because I paid for the fiber optics. They ate because I bought the groceries. I looked at the internet router blinking happily in the corner of the TV stand. Ryan spent all day connected, gaming online or watching videos, consuming bandwidth that I paid for religiously. I set the mug down on the coffee table and picked up my cell phone. I logged into the internet provider's management app. It was a simple app the technician had taught me how to use when they installed the service. Just in case you ever need to reboot the modem, ma'am. But being naturally curious, I had explored all the features. I searched for the list of connected devices. There were more than 15. Sarah's iPhone, Ryan's laptop, the gaming console, and a bunch of unknown devices which were surely the cell phones of the guests currently getting soaked outside. With a calmness that frightened me a little, I selected the parental control option, and then pause internet for all devices, except this one. I confirmed the action. On the security camera screen, I watched as several of the guests pulled out their phones, looked at them in confusion and shook them, as if that would magically bring the signal back. Ryan, who had been trying to call someone, a locksmith, the police, stared at his phone in disbelief and then yelled something at the sky. I smiled. Without Wi-Fi, their youth party was officially dead, even if they managed to find a dry roof somewhere. But that was just the beginning. Cutting the internet was an annoyance. What came next was going to be major surgery. I went back to my office with my coffee in hand. I sat at the desk and opened the black folder again. I pulled out a sheet of heavy, elegant letterhead paper. the kind hardly anyone uses anymore. I picked up my fountain pen. I was not going to yell at them. I was not going to go out and fight in the rain and risk catching pneumonia. My battle would be silent, written, and legal. I started to draft. To the attention of the temporary occupants of the property located at... My handwriting was cursive, firm, angular. The words flowed with a clarity I had not felt in years. I was drafting a memorandum. No, it was not a memorandum. It was an eviction notice disguised as new house rules. But I knew that Ryan, with his wounded macho pride, would never accept the new rules, and that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted them gone, but I wanted it to be their decision, or at least for them to feel like they had no other choice. The sound of the rain shifted slightly. The hail had stopped, but the downpour continued with a depressing constancy. I looked at the wall clock. 45 minutes had passed since I locked the door. 45 minutes in which Helen, the useless old woman, had died, and Helen, the lady of the house, had been resurrected. I heard a loud noise at the front door. Sharp metallic bangs. They were using something to hit the wood. Maybe a rock from the garden or a barbecue tool. I stood up slowly without spilling a single drop of my coffee. I walked to the entryway. I could feel the vibration of the blows through the floor. "Open up, damn it!" I heard Ryan's voice, hoarse, distorted by the thick wood. "I know you are in there. This is illegal. I am going to sue you for kidnapping." Kidnapping? What an absolute moron. They were in my yard with clear access to the street through the side gate that I never locked because it was rusted. They could leave whenever they wanted. They just could not come in here. I stepped closer to the door, but not to open it. I stepped closer to make sure the top deadbolt, the one that can only be locked from the inside, was securely in place. It was. "Ignorance is bold," I whispered, resting my forehead against the cool wood. I went back to the living room. It was going to be a long night, and I had a lot to plan. Tomorrow morning, when the storm passed and the sun came out, they were going to wake up to a very different reality. The door lock would not be the only code that had changed. I sat down again and grabbed the folder. There was one other document I needed to review, the will. I had drawn it up 5 years ago, leaving everything to Sarah. "To my beloved daughter, the light of my eyes." I crossed out the phrase, "the light of my eyes," with a thick, black, definitive line. The ink shined wet under the reading lamp. I still did not know who I would leave my estate to, maybe to a cat rescue or the church, or maybe I would blow it all on luxury senior citizen cruises. But what I was absolutely sure of was that Ryan's future had just gotten much darker than the storm hanging over him. I looked at the camera screen one last time. They had given up. I saw them walking toward the side gate, dragging the coolers, soaked to the bone, utterly defeated. They were leaving, probably to a friend's house or a cheap motel, assuming Ryan had any credit left on his cards, which I highly doubted. The house fell into absolute silence, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and my own steady breathing. I took a final sip of my spiced coffee. It was sweet, perfect. The real storm for them was not the rain. The real storm was going to start tomorrow at 8 in the morning when I made my first call to the bank. The next morning arrived with a deceptive calm, the kind that smells like wet earth and forced cleanliness. I got up at 6, just like always, ignoring the dull ache in my lower back. There was no time for ailments while the sun was beginning to dry up the puddles in the patio. I was already dialing the number for Arthur, the locksmith who had serviced my catering company for 20 years. "Good morning, Mrs. Helen. So early and with an emergency?" His raspy voice sounded like heaven to me. "I need you to change the cylinders on the main entrance, the service door, and the garage gate, Arthur. And I need it done right now. I will pay triple for a Sunday emergency." He did not ask questions. People of my generation know that when a serious woman asks to change the locks at dawn on a Sunday, it is not a whim. It is for survival. While I waited for him, I dedicated myself to cleaning the house, but not with a broom and mop. I sat at the dining room table with my tablet and a list of phone numbers I had compiled during the night. The house was quiet, a different kind of quiet than yesterday. It was no longer the silence of loneliness, but the silence of strategy. I felt like I was back in the old days, right before a major event for 500 people, double-checking that every piece of silverware was in its proper place. Except this time, the event was my own life, and the main course was cold dignity. Arthur arrived at 7:30. The sound of the drill piercing the metal of the front door was music to my ears. While he worked, I observed the backyard through the glass. The disaster was monumental. Broken bottles, napkins plastered to the grass like papier-mâché, the grill knocked over. But what caught my attention the most was seeing Ryan's truck parked out on the street, partially blocking my driveway. They had come back. They did not ring the bell right away. They were probably sleeping off their hangovers in the car or arguing. I took advantage of that time. I went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and took out the plastic containers of food I had prepared for the week. Not for them, of course. I started emptying the contents of the containers that Sarah usually took to work without asking permission. The beef stew, the pasta soup, the homemade salsas. Everything went down the garbage disposal. The mechanical noise of the machine swallowing my culinary efforts was strangely satisfying. If this house was no longer a home for them, it was not going to be a free restaurant either. At 9 o'clock sharp, I heard the first attempt. Ryan's key slid into the lock, turned, and hit the resistance of the new mechanism. There was a pause. Then came the metallic sound of the key being forced, jiggled with impatience. "Damn it," I heard his muffled voice say. "Sarah, give me your key. Mine is not turning." Then came Sarah's attempt, the same result. The silence of confusion lasted a few seconds, followed by sharp knocks on the door. Mom, open up, the lock is stuck." I was sitting in the living room armchair, a cup of chamomile tea in my hand, staring at the door like someone admiring an abstract painting. I did not move. I let them knock a little longer. I wanted them to feel the coldness of the wood, the hardness of the oak that separates the outside from the inside. After 5 minutes of pounding and shouting, my cell phone vibrated. It was Sarah. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then Ryan's called. I declined the call and proceeded with the next phase of my plan, the logistical suffocation. I opened my banking app. Ryan had a supplementary credit card tied to my account, an extension I gave him for household emergencies, which he regularly used for gas, cigarettes, and dinners with friends. I looked at the pending charges from yesterday: $40 at a liquor store, $60 at a convenience store. With a precise swipe of my index finger, I selected the card. Option: block due to loss or theft. Confirm. At that exact moment, I imagined the look on Ryan's face the next time he tried to swipe that plastic and the terminal spit out a declined message. It was not cruelty. It was basic financial education. If you do not contribute, you do not spend. The knocking at the door stopped. I peeked discreetly through the side window blind. They were walking toward the garage. Ryan was throwing his hands in the air, red with anger, while Sarah rubbed her arms, still wearing the damp, wrinkled clothes from the night before. They looked pathetic, stripped of that aura of youthful superiority they had flaunted yesterday. Without their music and their friends, they were just two irresponsible adults facing a Sunday morning without a roof over their heads. They tried to open the electric garage gate with the remote control they kept in the car. The motor did not respond. I had disconnected the power supply to the system from the breaker box. Ryan got out of the car and started yanking on the metal gate manually, but the internal lock was in place. It was then that I decided it was time to make an appearance. I was not going to open the door for them, but they needed to know this was not a mechanical malfunction. I walked out through the kitchen door that opens to the side alley, which was protected by a wrought iron gate that reached the ceiling. I walked slowly until I was visible, yet completely safe behind the heavy iron bars. They spotted me immediately. Ryan sprinted toward the gate, his eyes bloodshot. "Mother-in-law, what is wrong with this house? Nothing works. Open the gate so we can pull the truck in. We are freezing out here," he yelled, gripping the iron bars like a desperate inmate. Sarah approached much slower, her head hanging low. At least she had the decency to feel ashamed. "Good morning," I said, using a tone of voice so flat and professional that even I surprised myself. It was not the voice of her mother, it was the voice of the owner. "The house is undergoing maintenance. It is closed for inventory and repairs." "What are you talking about, Mom?" Sarah whimpered, stepping closer to the gate. "Please, just let us in. I need a shower and I have a massive headache. Yesterday was... Things just got out of hand. Yes, I am sorry. Just open the door." I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders. I looked her in the eyes and saw the little girl who used to manipulate me with temper tantrums. But that little girl was 35 years old now. Yesterday was not an accident, Sarah. It was a declaration of principles. Ryan was very clear. Your space is for the youth, and I am simply respecting that. I have decided that my house, this old lady's house, is no longer suitable for your vibrant lifestyle. Ryan let out a nervous, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, come on, lady, do not be so dramatic. It was a joke. Open the gate already. I need to use the bathroom and get some clean clothes. I am not in the mood for your senile old lady mind games." That was the straw that broke the camel's back, or rather, the one that cemented my verdict. Senile old lady. You are right, Ryan. At this age, a person tends to forget things. For example, I forgot why I have been paying your truck insurance for 2 years, or why I pay for your cell phone plans. But this morning, thank God, my memory came back. I pulled a sealed white envelope from my pocket. I slid it through the iron bars of the gate. It dropped to the ground right at Ryan's feet. "What is this?" he asked, staring at it with suspicion. "It is the invoice for the damages to the garden, the specialized cleaning crew that is coming tomorrow, and the cost of the new locks. Oh, and a copy of the lease agreement you never signed, which we are now going to execute under the squatters' rights law." Ryan bent down, snatched the envelope, and ripped it open aggressively. His eyes scanned the paper, and his jaw tightened. "You are crazy. You cannot charge us for living in your daughter's house," he roared, crumpling the paper. "Sarah, say something to your mother." Sarah looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of inconvenience. She wanted me to cave in just so her husband would stop yelling. She wanted a cheap peace, the kind you buy with my submission. "Mom, please," she began. "No, Sarah," I cut her off instantly. "You both said this place is strictly for a younger crowd. Perfect. The world out there is very big and full of opportunities for strong, young people like yourselves. Go find a place where you make the rules and where you actually pay the bills." I turned around to head back into the kitchen. "Do not you dare turn your back on us," Ryan shouted, punching the iron gate with his fist. "My clothes are in there, my documents, my trophies." I stopped and slowly turned my head. "Your things will be in boxes on the sidewalk at 12 noon. If you are not here to pick them up, I will call the city trash collection. And Ryan..." I paused to make sure he heard me well. "Try to force one more lock and I will call the police. I have the security footage from last night and this morning, breaking and entering, and damage to private property. You have a record for getting into fights, right? I do not think a patrol car showing up here would do you any good." The mention of his record, a dirty little secret from his youth that Sarah had confided in me during a moment of weakness, worked like a switch. Ryan turned pale. He stood speechless, his mouth hanging open, slowly processing that the useless old woman knew much more than she let on. I went back into the house and double-locked the kitchen door. My hands were not shaking. My heart was beating at a steady, strong pace. I felt powerful, but not euphoric. This was a job, and I was only halfway done. I went to the guest room, the one they were occupying. The smell of confinement, dirty laundry, and cheap deodorant hit my nose hard. It was a complete disaster. Clothes thrown everywhere, plates with leftover food shoved under the bed, damp towels tossed on top of the fine wood furniture. I took a deep breath. I was not going to start crying over the state of my house. I was going to pack. I pulled out the cardboard boxes I kept in the attic, large industrial-grade boxes. I started throwing their things in without a second thought. I did not fold the clothes. I did not match the socks. Everything went in exactly as it fell. Ryan's plastic trophies, his baseball caps, Sarah's high heels, her expensive makeup. While I was filling the third box, I found something hidden under the mattress, a blue folder. Curiosity won out over my rush to pack. I opened it. They were nursing home brochures, Happy Sunset Residence, Peace Geriatric Home, and right next to the brochures, some scribbles on a piece of notebook paper in Sarah's handwriting. Sale of the house, $800,000 approximately. Monthly nursing home cost, $5,000. Net profit. The air escaped my lungs. I had to sit down on the edge of the unmade bed. They did not just want me out of my backyard. They wanted me out of my life. They were planning to sell me out, to get rid of me like you get rid of an old dog, just so they could keep the money from the sale of my house. The initial sadness lasted only as long as it takes a match to burn out, and then it gave way to a blaze of cold, white, pure fury. Up until that moment, I had only thought about teaching them a lesson, maybe leaving them locked out for a few days so they would appreciate what they had. But seeing those numbers, seeing how they had calculated the price of my freedom and my legacy, I understood that this was total war. I stood up. My back no longer hurt. The years no longer weighed me down. I took the blue folder and locked it inside my own floor safe. That would be my evidence, my permanent reminder of why I could not show any mercy. I finished packing their things in record time. 12 boxes sealed with thick packing tape. I dragged them one by one to the garage entrance. They were heavy, but adrenaline is a wonderful drug. At 11:30, I called a local moving service. "Good afternoon. I need a small truck to move some boxes. Yes, it is urgent. No, they are not going very far. They are going to the street. Yes, to the sidewalk right out front." While I waited for the truck, I made myself a sandwich. I ate with a real appetite, savoring every single bite. I looked at the clock. It was 10 minutes to 12. I went back out to the side patio. Ryan and Sarah were still there, sitting on the curb under the meager shade of a street tree. They looked like two castaways waiting for a rescue that would never come. When they saw the moving truck arrive, they stood up, hopeful, perhaps thinking I was sending their furniture to them for a proper move. I opened the electric garage door. I had reconnected the power just for this. The movers started bringing the boxes out and leaving them on the sidewalk, right where they were standing. "What is this?" Sarah yelled, seeing her silk dresses poking out of a poorly taped box. I walked out to the edge of my property line, right where my tiles end and the public concrete begins. "There is everything," I said, crossing my arms. "Check it if you want. Nothing material is missing. What is missing, what you lost forever, does not fit in a box." Ryan took a step toward me, looking threatening. "This is illegal. I am going to sue you. This house is my wife's inheritance." I smiled. It was a small, sharp smile. "Inheritance is for when someone dies, Ryan, and I am more alive than ever." I pulled out my cell phone and took a picture of them surrounded by boxes on the street. "By the way," I added as the moving truck drove away, "I just changed my will, and I also just sent that picture to the family group chat, along with an explanatory note about the nursing home brochures I found under your bed. I think Aunt Betty just saw it. She's typing right now." Sarah's face completely fell apart. She knew the social judgment of our family would be faster and more brutal than any storm. I slowly closed the metal gate, enjoying the sound of the electric motor sealing my fortress. Right before it closed completely, I heard my daughter's muffled cry, but this time I did not stop. I went back to my office. There was one last loose end to tie up: my company. I had left it in the hands of a manager so I could get some rest, but it was clear that my rest was officially over. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of my old business partner. "Richard, it is Helen." "Yes, the one and only. Listen to me carefully. Get ready, because I am coming back, and I am coming back hungry." I hung up and looked out the window. The sky was completely clear, an almost insulting blue. It was a beautiful day to start over. The phone on the coffee table would not stop vibrating. It seemed like an angry insect trying to free itself, buzzing against the varnished wood. It was not a call. It was notifications. Hundreds of them. The family group chat, the same one that used to be filled with good morning memes and badly spelled prayers, had turned into an inquisition tribunal in a matter of minutes. I poured myself a little more tea, with the calm of someone watching a scheduled demolition from a safe distance. I did not need to read the messages to know what they said. Aunt Betty, who has a tongue sharper than a butcher's knife, had surely already forwarded the photo of the nursing home brochures to her kids, and they to their cousins. The news that poor Aunt Helen was going to be thrown away like an old piece of junk just so they could sell her house had spread like wildfire. From my window, protected by the lace curtains, I watched Sarah staring at her cell phone on the sidewalk. Her face went from indignation to absolute panic. Ryan, right beside her, was waving his hands in the air, yelling at the screen of his own phone, probably trying to delete messages or offer explanations that no one was going to believe. Loose lips sink ships, and bad sons-in-law sink through group chats. I muttered, taking a sip of my tea. But Ryan was not the type to surrender with dignity. His arrogance was a chronic disease that prevented him from seeing reality. I saw him walk to his truck, pull something out of the glove compartment, and march back toward my gate with the air of a 4-star general. He dialed a number, put it on speakerphone, and waited, staring defiantly at the security camera, which he knew I was monitoring. Minutes later, a city police cruiser pulled up in front of the house, its lights spinning silently. There was his play. He wanted to scare me. He wanted to use the law, or whatever he understood the law to be, to force his way in. He thought that seeing a uniform would make my knees buckle and have me running to open the door, begging for forgiveness for being a rebellious old woman. I stood up from the armchair. I did not feel fear. I felt that cold clarity that accompanied me whenever I had to fire an employee who had been stealing from the company. I went to my office and opened the desk drawer. I did not pull out a weapon, of course. I pulled out something much more lethal in these circumstances, a manila file folder, old and worn around the edges, and my contact book, one of those old red leather ones with the alphabet tabs in black. I walked to the front door. I made sure I was wearing my glasses, hanging from their gold chain, and that my clothes were impeccable. Image is everything. I opened the solid wood door and then the security gate, stepping out onto the porch, but staying well inside my property line, behind the front yard fence. The officer who stepped out of the cruiser was a sturdy man with a thick mustache and a no-nonsense face. Ryan lunged at him immediately, pointing his finger at me as if I were a criminal. "Officer! That woman illegally kicked us out!" Ryan yelled, practically spitting in his desperation. "She is a senile old lady. She's holding our belongings hostage. I demand you make her let us in. We live there." The police officer adjusted his belt and walked toward the gate. Sarah stayed behind, sobbing, hiding her face in her hands, embarrassed that the neighbors were starting to peek out their windows. When the officer was about 6 feet away from me, he stopped dead in his tracks. He narrowed his eyes under the brim of his hat, and his hard expression melted into genuine surprise. "Mrs. Helen?" he asked, lowering his voice. I smiled, a polite, maternal, but firm smile. "Good afternoon, Officer Miller. How is your mother recovering from her hip surgery? I remember sending her some chicken soup last month." Ryan stood, petrified. He looked at the police officer and then at me, unable to comprehend what was happening. "She is doing much better, Mrs. Helen. Thank you very much. She's already walking around," Officer Miller replied, taking off his hat out of respect. I apologized for the disturbance. This young man reported a violent eviction and an at-risk situation involving an incapacitated senior citizen. I let out a soft, dry laugh. "Incapacitated?" Officer, I just finished my tax inventory. What you see here is not an illegal eviction. It is an eviction for breach of contract and, unfortunately, an attempted procedural fraud on the part of these youngsters. I pulled the documents out of the manila folder. Here's the property deed, sole owner. Here are the utility bills, all under my name. And here, I held up the nursing home brochures and the sheet of paper with Sarah's calculations, is the evidence that these people, whom I took in out of family charity, were conspiring to have me declared incompetent so they could sell my house. Officer Miller took the papers through the iron bars. He reviewed them briefly. His face hardened again. But this time, the disapproving look was not meant for me. He slowly turned toward Ryan. Son, it says right here that you do not pay rent, that you are a guest. And from what I can see on the street, your belongings have already been handed over to you. But we have been living there for 2 years. We have rights, Ryan shrieked, losing all composure. She cannot do this to us. She is my mother-in-law. What she is the property owner, Miller said, handing the papers back to me gently. And if she says you are not coming in, you are not coming in. If you insist on causing trouble, I will have to take you in for disturbing the peace. And Mrs. Helen is a highly respected citizen in this town. I do not recommend picking a fight with her. Ryan turned red, a shade that rivaled the bricks on my facade. He tried to take a step forward in a purely instinctive gesture of physical intimidation. You do not know who I am, Ryan bellowed. I am going to call my lawyer. This is an abuse of authority. It was my turn. I opened my red address book, the one I had carefully maintained through a 40-year career. Go ahead, Ryan. Call Mr. Montgomery. I assume that is who you are planning to call, right? He is the only cheap lawyer you know from your soccer club. Ryan stopped, his phone in his hand. How do you know? I know because Mr. Montgomery is the one who drafted my company's contracts 15 years ago, I said, savoring every single syllable. And I also know that you still owe him $300 for a consultation from last year. If you call him, he will most likely try to collect before he even says hello. But if you want, I can call him for you. I have his personal cell phone number right here. I am sure he would love to know you are trying to scam his former client. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to quiet down to listen to my son-in-law's ultimate defeat. The useless old woman did not just hold the keys to the house, she held the keys to the city. Sarah walked up to the gate, her eyes swollen. There was no trace left of the haughty woman who had ordered me to my room. Now she was just a frightened little girl who had just realized that the world is a cold place without her mother's coat to hide under. "Mom, please," she whispered, gripping the cold iron bars. "We have nowhere to go. Ryan has no cash right now. Just let us in for today. I promise you we will look for something tomorrow. Do not do this to us in front of the neighbors." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw my own eyes in her face, but without the fire that burned behind mine. I had raised a woman who preferred to be an idiot's shadow rather than the master of her own destiny, and that hurt me more than any betrayal. Shame, Sarah, is something you feel when you do something wrong, not when you face the consequences, I told her, my voice soft but firm. You two did not think about my shame when you treated me like a burden in my own home. You did not think about my dignity when you planned to lock me up in a nursing home to steal my money. I took a step back. You have your boxes, you have your truck, and you have your health. That is more than many people have. Now leave, before I decide to call the bank and execute the promissory note on Ryan's loan today. Mentioning the promissory note was the final blow. Ryan knew that if I moved that chess piece, they would not just be homeless, but his truck would be repossessed and his bank accounts would be frozen at zero. He looked at me with pure, distilled hatred, the hatred of a mediocre man who has been exposed. "Let's go, Sarah," he spat, turning around sharply. "This old hag is going to die completely alone, rotting in her money, and when that happens, do not expect me to show up at your funeral." "Do not worry about it, Ryan," I replied. raising my voice so the neighbors who were pretending to sweep their sidewalks could hear me. My funeral will be a first-class event, with fine wine and decent people. You would not even make it past the parking lot. Officer Miller tipped his hat to say goodbye and stood there on the sidewalk, arms crossed, making sure they loaded their boxes into the truck and got out of there. I stood there on my porch, watching them load their messy lives into the bed of their pickup. Sarah cried silently as she stuffed her balled-up silk dresses into black trash bags they had pulled from who knows where. Ryan threw the boxes with rage, probably breaking half of his trophies in the process. When the truck engine roared and they drove down the street, leaving behind a cloud of gray exhaust, I felt my shoulders drop about 2 inches. The heavy weight was gone. I went into the house and closed the door. The click of the lock sounded absolutely final. Perfect. The house was quiet, but it was no longer an empty silence. It was a clean silence. I walked to the kitchen. My footsteps echoed on the marble. I felt light, strangely young. I made myself something to eat, not a quick sandwich. I pulled out a fish fillet I had in the freezer, some capers, a splash of white wine. I was going to cook for myself. I was going to use the good china. The plates Sarah always said were too formal for everyday use. Today was a celebration. While the fish sizzled in the pan, my cell phone rang. It was Richard, my former business partner and the manager of my catering company. "Helen, I got your message. Are you serious? You want to come back? I thought you were enjoying your retirement with the family." I put the phone on speaker while I chopped some fresh herbs from the small indoor garden I kept by the kitchen window. Retirement is highly overrated, Richard, and family, well, let us just say I have decided to do a little corporate restructuring in my personal life. I need to stay busy. My mind is too sharp to waste it watching soap operas and waiting around to die. Well, to be honest, we desperately need your touch, Richard admitted, relief flooding his voice. The new suppliers are eating us alive, and the clients are complaining that the seasoning just is not the same. But Helen, are you sure? The pace is grueling. I laughed, a deep laugh that came all the way from my stomach. Richard, I just evicted 2 parasites, faced down the police, and reorganized my entire financial portfolio in less than 24 hours. I think I can handle a couple of weddings and a few corporate events. I will be there tomorrow at 9 in the morning, and I want to see the accounting books from the last year. I have a gut feeling there are some leaks that need plugging. I hung up. I served my food and sat at the head of the dining room table. That massive mahogany table where we used to have Christmas dinner, which lately had only served as a dumping ground for Ryan's keys and junk mail. I ate slowly, savoring every single bite. It was delicious, better than anything I had tasted in the last 2 years. When I finished, I grabbed my glass of wine and walked into the living room. The security shutters were still down, creating that cool, dim atmosphere. I pressed the button on the wall. With a soft hum, the metal sheets began to rise. The late afternoon light, golden and warm, flooded the room. The sun poured in, illuminating the dust floating in the air, making the freshly polished floor shine. I looked out at the patio. It was destroyed. Yes, the grass was scorched by the charcoal. The pergola was filthy. But it was my disaster, and I had the money, the time, and the good taste to fix it. Maybe I would tear down that hideous pergola Ryan loved so much and plant a jacaranda tree. I had always wanted a jacaranda tree. Suddenly, I noticed a detail in the corner of the living room. There was a small box I had forgotten to take out. It was an old shoebox. I walked over and opened it. Inside were the photos from Sarah's wedding. Her dressed in white, smiling, and me standing right next to her in a blue dress, looking at her with overwhelming pride. Ryan was there too, wearing that used car salesman smile that I really should have spotted sooner. I felt a pang in my chest. I'm not going to lie. I am a mother, and the umbilical cord is never fully cut. It just stretches until it hurts. But then I remembered the nursing home brochures. I remembered the phrase, "This is strictly a younger crowd." I closed the box. I did not throw it in the trash. I carried it to the utility room and placed it on the very top shelf, way up there where you keep the things you no longer use, the things that are broken, but that still form a part of the history of the house. It would stay there, gathering dust, serving as a reminder of what happens when you love someone without setting boundaries. I went back to my office. I had work to do. I turned on my computer, that powerful machine Ryan always coveted for his video games. I logged into my online banking. The joint account I shared with Sarah popped up on the screen. It held a considerable sum, my life savings, which I had put her name on just in case anything ever happened to me. Well, something did happen to me, I said out loud. I woke up. I clicked on Transfer Between Own Accounts. I moved every last penny into my personal account, the one only I controlled. I left the joint account with a balance of exactly $10, just enough so the bank would not automatically close it, ensuring they would receive the notification of their current balance. Then I looked up the contact info for the travel agency I used to book anniversary trips with my husband. "Good afternoon," I typed into the customer service chat. "I would like some information about cruises. No, not for families, for singles, luxury class, around the world. Yes, I have immediate availability, and the budget is unlimited." While I waited for a response, I leaned back in my swivel chair. My hands stroked the leather armrests. I felt powerful. It was not the loud, vulgar power Ryan displayed with his blasting music. It was a silent, subterranean power, like the roots of an ancient tree that tear up the pavement without anyone noticing until it is far too late. The screen blinked with a message from the agency. "How wonderful, Mrs. Helen. We actually have a suite available on the Queen Mary II departing in 3 weeks. Are you interested?" I smiled. 3 weeks? That is enough time to get the company in order, hire a landscaper to plant my jacaranda tree, and make sure the new locks are working perfectly. "Book it," I typed back, "and make sure it has a balcony. I like to watch the storms from a distance." I closed the laptop. Evening was falling, and the house was filling with long, peaceful shadows. I felt alone, yes, but for the first time in years, that loneliness did not feel like abandonment. It felt like absolute freedom. Tomorrow, when I walked into the company, everyone would see the same old Helen, the boss, the one who never lets a single accounting error slide. But inside, I knew that something had changed forever. I had discovered that my old age was not a sentence of obsolescence, but a suit of armor, forged through experience. They thought my light was fading out. They did not know I was just firing up my backup engines. I stood up to pour myself another glass of wine. As I walked past the mirror in the hallway, I stopped. I looked at myself. The wrinkles were still there. The white hair was still there. But the woman staring back at me had her chin held high and a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. "Cheers, Helen," I toasted my reflection. "Welcome back." And as I drank, I knew that the real storm for Ryan and Sarah was not the heavy rain from last night, nor was it being evicted today. The real storm would be living the rest of their lives knowing they had all of this, and they lost it because they thought they were smarter than the woman who taught them how to walk. 6 months have passed since the storm. If you look at my garden now, you would not recognize that muddy battlefield scattered with red plastic cups. The pretentious pergola Ryan had installed was dismantled the very week after the eviction. In its place, I had them plant the jacaranda tree I always wanted. It is still young, a slender trunk that promises bright violet flowers for next spring, but it is mine. Beneath it, there is no cheap plastic furniture, but an elegant white wrought iron patio set, durable and resilient, just like me. The silence in the house has changed texture. Before, it was a heavy silence, loaded with the anxiety of waiting for them to arrive and shatter the peace with their music or their demands. Now, it is a clean, productive silence. It is the sound of the coffee maker dripping in the morning, of my own confident footsteps on the marble, and of the notifications on my tablet announcing new contracts. Because yes, I went back. And I did not go back to sit in a corner giving advice nobody asked for. I went back to take charge. Richard, my partner, nearly passed out when I walked into the office that Monday, wearing my navy blue tailored suit with an audit binder tucked under my arm. In less than a week, I discovered that the previous accountant was robbing us blind by purchasing second-rate ingredients. I fired him myself, without raising my voice, simply sliding the printed spreadsheets across the desk. Math does not have feelings, and neither do I when it comes to thieves, I told him before asking him to empty his desk. That very same afternoon, I implemented a new company policy, the Golden Division. I decided to exclusively hire women over the age of 60 to supervise quality control and prepare our traditional recipes, the ones that require patience and an expert hand. Women who, just like me, had been tossed aside for being too slow or too old-fashioned. Ryan lost his truck. The bank repossessed it a month ago. And Sarah is working. Working? I asked, raising an eyebrow as I cut a slice of cake. Doing what? She is a receptionist at a dental clinic, full-time. They say she looks very thin and she does not have her nails done anymore. I felt a twinge of pain, of course I did. She is my daughter. But then I remembered the nursing home brochures. I remembered that she was perfectly willing to lock me away in a 10-by-10 room just so she would not have to get a job. Now she was finally learning the value of $1, the value I had hidden from her, by handing her everything on a silver platter. Hard work brings dignity, Betty, I said, bringing the teacup to my lips. It will be good for her. Maybe that way she will finally understand how much every plate of food she ate in my house without saying, thank you, actually cost. There was no rescue. There was no secret check sent in the mail. I let life, which is the strictest teacher of all, give them the lesson I had failed to teach them in time. One afternoon, leaving the grocery store, I ran into Ryan. He was bagging a lady's groceries at the register next to mine. He was wearing the supermarket uniform and looked 10 years older with a hollowed-out face and thinning hair. He saw me. He froze with a can of tuna in his hand. I waited for the insult, the mockery, the old witch comment, but none of that came. He lowered his eyes. He shrugged, completely ashamed, and went back to putting the items in the bag. In that exact moment, I understood that my victory was absolute. I did not need to yell at him, nor sue him. I only needed to withdraw my financial support for his house of cards to collapse. He was a paper king who melted away with the very first drop of real rain. I walked out of the supermarket with my head held high, pushing my own cart, feeling wonderfully light. The impact of my return to an active life went far beyond the personal. At the company, the new hires created a massively positive buzz. Mrs. Carter, a 70-year-old widow who used to sell homemade gelatin on the street, is now my head sauce chef, earning a dignified salary with full benefits. The other day, she hugged me, crying, because she was finally able to buy new glasses for her grandson. "You gave us our dignity back, Mrs. Helen," she told me. "You made us feel useful again." "No, Mrs. Carter," I replied, adjusting my own glasses. "You were all always useful. It is just that the world was blind, and I simply lent them my glasses." That night, sitting in my study, I reflected on everything that had happened. I looked at my brand new passport sitting on the desk. I did not even hate the photo anymore. Those wrinkles around my eyes were maps of my laughter and the worries I had overcome. I realized that for years, I had been an accomplice to my own mistreatment. I had accepted the role of the victim, the mother-in-law, the always available grandmother, because I was terrified that if I said no, they would stop loving me. What a massive lie. The love that has to be bought with submission is not love. It is rent. And their lease expired on that stormy afternoon. Now I know that my house is not a hotel, it is my sanctuary. My money is not an early inheritance, it is the fruit of my labor meant for my enjoyment. And my time? My time is the most valuable resource I have, and I refuse to waste it on anyone who does not value it. The front doorbell rang. I checked the security monitor, which was now a high-definition screen I had installed last week. It was Sarah. She came alone. She did not have any suitcases, and she did not have Ryan. She was holding a simple bouquet of flowers, the kind they sell at traffic lights. I hesitated for a moment. My hand hovered over the gate release button. I could leave her outside. I had every right to. But then I remembered that true strength is not just about locking doors. It is about knowing how to open them on your own terms. I unlocked the front gate, but not the main door. I stepped out onto the porch. Sarah stood at the bottom of the steps. She looked exhausted, yes, but there was something different in her eyes. That hollow arrogance was completely gone. "Hello, Mom," she said in a soft voice. "Hello, Sarah." "These are for you," she offered the flowers through the railing. "I know it is not your birthday. I got my first full paycheck today and I wanted to bring you something, with my own money." I took the flowers. They were daisies, my absolute favorite. She actually remembered. "Thank you," I said dryly. "I am not here to ask for anything," she rushed to add, noticing my cautious expression. "Ryan and I are separating. He wanted me to come over and ask you for a loan to start a cell phone repair business. I told him no. I will be gone by 7. I promise." She walked into the house with respect, like someone entering a temple, carefully wiping her feet on the welcome mat. She did not reclaim her old bedroom or her spot at the head of the table. She sat in the kitchen, and we talked. Not as a mother and a dependent daughter, but as two adult women. I told her about my company. She told me how hard it is to stand on your feet for 8 hours a day. I did not offer her any money. I did not offer to let her move back in, and she did not ask. When she left, I locked the door with the same old gold key, but I no longer felt the need to engage the triple deadbolt. The danger had passed. I walked to my bedroom where my suitcase lay open on the bed. Tomorrow, my flight leaves to board the Queen Mary 2. 3 months of travel. South America, Africa, Europe. Completely alone. Or rather, by myself, which turns out to be excellent company. I packed my tablet, my wooden hand fan, and a brand new leather notebook to write my memoirs. No, not memoirs. My plans. Because at 68 years old, I'm just barely getting started on the 2nd volume of my encyclopedia. I looked out the window at the garden, illuminated by the automatic floodlights. The young jacaranda tree swayed gently in the night breeze. Resilient. Beautiful. Ryan had said that this place was strictly for a younger crowd. Poor fool. Youth is a disease that gets cured over time, but class, strength, and dignity are assets that only accumulate over the years. I turned off the light, ready to get some sleep before my grand voyage. My house was secure, my business was thriving, and my heart was entirely at peace. The storm had washed everything clean, leaving me with the only thing that truly matters at the end of the day, the absolute certainty that I am the captain of my own ship, and the forecast for tomorrow is clear skies and open seas.